Well, good morning. Welcome to the Ministry of Writing 25 Rejection-Proof Markets. Let's begin with a quick survey here. How many of you have received a rejection email or letter? Okay. How many of you have been published? Notice the correlation there? Only the rejected gets published. So I want to encourage you today that you're in the right place. You're going to take a look at the Ministry of Writing 25 Rejection-Proof Markets. I want to tell you about a guy who got lots of rejection slips. It's King Solomon. He had a huge platform, obviously, social networking, obviously. 1 Kings 4:34 said they came from all peoples to hear the wisdom of Solomon, from all the kings of earth who had heard of his wisdom. And yet King Solomon has a terrible, awful publishing record. Scripture tells us in 1 Kings 4:32, the king of Israel and Judah spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,500. So depending how you break up Proverbs, there are as many as 800 Proverbs in the book of Proverbs. In the Song of Songs, if you break that up by the individual movements, it's probably 8 songs. So that means that King Solomon, God's anointed one, that means he had 2,200 Proverbs and 997 songs rejected. So apparently at the Council of Nicaea, while your writing seems inspired, it does not suit our editorial needs at this time. So Solomon had just 1/4 success record for his nonfiction, and he had 0.0007% of his poetry published. So rejoice. You may have better sales records than King Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived. And we also find some encouragement from the Apostle Paul, who, even though he had a much better publishing record, he wrote half the New Testament, he had some important things to say to us. So I'm reading from the 1 Corinthians 12 out of the New Living Amplified Paraphrase, King James Watkins version for writers. And so let's read this aloud to receive some encouragement, if we could. All together. Now the body is not made of one part, but of many. If a writer should say, because I have not been published and focused on the family, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason cease to be a part of the body. If the whole body were writing for guideposts, who would write for take-home papers? But in fact, God has arranged the parts of the body, every one of them, just as He wanted them to be. If there were only one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many kinds of writers, but one body. A writer for decision cannot say to a writer for the church newsletter, I don't need you. And a best-selling author cannot say to the one who writes letters to the editor, I don't need you. On the contrary, those writers who don't command 6-figure advances are indispensable. And the writers who don't appear on the cover of today's Christian Woman deserve equal honor as those who do. And writers who are never interviewed on Christian talk shows are just as necessary as those in the spotlight. Here's the important part. But God has combined the members of the body and has given greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part receives a rejection slip, every part suffers with it. If one part signs a contract with Tyndale House, every part rejoices with it. Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of that body. I hope today you are going to learn that you are an incredibly indispensable part of the body of Christ, and particularly the body of Christ who are writers. Now, how many of you actually do believe that you are an indispensable part of this body of writers? We have 1, okay, we have 2, 3, okay, we're getting better. Unfortunately, this is the place, right here at this conference, is the place where you're going to feel really dispensable. Because when you look through people's bios, you see they've talked all over the world, they have written X number of books, X number of articles, and Christian publishing has a way of making us feel very dispensable. There are several trends in the publishing industry. Now, the good news is the standards for Christian writing are rising. If you read some of the novels from Christian novels from 1950s, you go, these are just dreadful. So the good news is the writing standards for Christian writing are getting higher and higher. The bad news is the standards for writing in Christianity are getting higher and higher. So it's no longer just good enough. You have got to be an excellent writer. The good news is there's still room for freelance writers. The bad news is there's only 1% of freelance writers. Fortunately, 99% of those probably are posers. They've never picked up a copy of the Christian Writers Market Guide. They've never read the Publisher's Writer's Guidelines. I worked for a magazine, was the editor of a magazine called In Touch. And you would be surprised the number of submissions I got for therapeutic massage. Oh, In Touch, massage, I'll send this article. And some of them were rather untherapeutic massage. I mean, good grief, did they read that we're a Christian publisher? So you have a real step up here. You're at a conference. You're learning how to write a proposal. You're learning what the market is looking for. And if you'll simply do a bit of research, you're going to increase your odds dramatically, exponentially in getting published. Good news, religious books are becoming bestsellers. If you want to pull that back so you're not in the spray zone, that would probably make you feel more better. Good news is religious books are becoming bestsellers. You know, the Left Behind series sold 65 million copies. Purpose-Driven Life is the best-selling nonfiction book of all time. And again, the bad news is religious books are becoming bestsellers. So unless your name is Jerry Jenkins, people may not want to be eager to sign you up. So here's a bit of a reality check. According to Publishers Weekly, of the 1.2 million books tracked by Nielsen Bookscan, 950,000, or 79%, sold less than 99 copies. Ooh, 79% of all books will sell less than 99 copies. If you sell 100, you're in the top 20% of sales. 200,000, or 17%, sold less than 1,000 copies. In fact, the average book only sells 500 copies. 25,000 sold more than 5,000 copies. 500 sold more than 100. And only 10 of 1.2 million sold 1 million copies. So the good news is you're at a writers' conference. The bad news is you're at a writers' conference. But here's how we begin to feel dispensable. First of all, we compare. And that's why in 1 Corinthians 12, Paul explains that we're not to be looking at other parts of the body. We are only to be looking at how God has created us. So if you look at the brochures of all those people who are selling bazillion books, I made a mistake one time. I was up in Seattle speaking, and I ended up at a autograph party sitting next to Frank Peretti. This is when This Present Darkness had just hit the top. And so Frank has this line waiting for him way back to Nebraska, and I've got maybe one or two. And so I probably sold maybe 20 books that night. But as he was going, Frank, next, Frank, next, I was going, dear friend, thank you for buying my book so I don't look like a complete loser with no one standing in my line. I am forever grateful. God bless you. Thank you. Oh, here comes someone else. You can leave now. 3 John 2, Jim. Meanwhile, Frank is going, Frank. So I could feel just a little bit intimidated and start to compare myself to Frank Peretti. The next thing is to copy myself. Okay, I'm going to become the next writer of This Present Darkness. I'm going to sell millions of copies. I'm going to be interviewed on Good Morning America. And when that doesn't happen, surprise, I start to criticize. Well, This Present Darkness started out really slow. You really don't get to the gist of it until page 20. Or, I don't know, sometimes his writing's a little sophomoric. And so for years, I struggled to become a big-time author. I had 6 books published with very small denominational publishing houses, had 300 articles published, but they were mostly in take-home papers, which are kind of the Rodney Dangerfield of publishing, no respect, no respect. And then in '92, I read Thomas Kempis's Imitation of Christ, and the one line that stabbed me in the heart was, "To be content as an unknown." I was like, but I have such a witness on Oprah. I could reach millions of people. God, what is the problem here? And so I really had a struggle with being my part in the body of Christ. I tend to write things that don't allow Christian people, to sit comfortably in their padded pews. So in the body of Christ, I'm a hemorrhoid, and I'm learning to become content with that. I can either be a second-class Frank Peretti or Jerry Jenkins or Rick Warren, or I can be a first-class Jim Watkins. And look at your name tag. I can either be, Francine Rivers, or what it says on your first class, what it says on your name tag. So we're going to look at ways that we can have a true ministry that may not involve selling 600 million copies, may not get you on the 700 Club or TBN or Good Morning America. But here are ways that people have had a truly ministry writing. And the first thing, and these are going to seem really, you don't think of these as writing because we have limited what we think of as writing to books and articles. But here's some ways to really be effective. And the first are letters. Many authors never intended their writing to have a worldwide audience. Emily Dickinson's poetry was written as encouragement letters to her friends. And she would become furious when her friends would turn them into publishers. They started showing up in prestigious literary magazines. Many of John Wesley, C.S. Lewis, Francis Schaeffer's letters were never intended for publication, but have blessed thousands of readers. And the greatest example of all has got to be the Apostle Paul. He did not sit down and write a book proposal to the Nicene Council or whoever, Jerusalem Press. These were passionate pastoral letters to the people in Corinth and Colossae and Ephesus. And so he never, ever intended to see his writing become worldwide. And you too can have a ministry of writing, of encouragement, of advice, of inspiration. Number one are family and friends. Probably the most life-changing piece that I ever written was the following song. Woke up this morning, the two of you on my mind, thinking how you're changing me, seeing where I was blind. And I look up to the sky above and wonder if you knew how nice it feels loving God and you. Sharing our dreams together, talking of his love, caught up in a triangle with you and God above. And I wonder how I got by, for I met the two of you. Now I'm complete, loving God and you. I wonder if it'll last this time, this feeling between me and you, or if it's another transition from her to someone new. But if my wish is answered, and if it's his wish too, I'll spend my life loving God and you. I wrote that in 1973 to Lois, and sang that in girls' dorm lobby to Lois Farah, and on February 12th, 1973, and in August 3rd of 74, she changed her last name to Watkins. Mm-hmm. So that was a life-changing piece of writing. Okay, Bob McDowell's wife was dying of cancer, and so each day he would write her a letter, just expressing certain qualities about her that he just really respected. And that certainly changed the last few weeks of her life. So don't forget your spouse. Write to your children and grandchildren. Again, some of the most life-changing writing I've done for my kids and now my grandchildren. And I've also saved all the emails I sent to my daughter and son during their college years. I thought I had a really good relationship with my daughter, Faith. But in college, her emails, she was just pouring out her heart to me. And I asked her about that. So, we've always really been close, but it just, there's a new level here, and I'm not understanding it. I'm loving it, but I don't understand it. She rolls her eyes, classic teen response. Well, Dad, I can choose my words carefully, and I don't have to look at you. So letter writing. may be a way. Emails to your kids, your grandkids. Consider changing your children's life with your writing. Don't forget your friends. Some of the best encouragement I received was from a listserv of humor writers. And while I've never met many of them personally, they have been close friends on Facebook. Those away from home, collegians, missionaries, military personnel, prisoners. In my 3 weeks teaching in India, those emails from my kids and my wife, they were my one thread of sanity. India is just an incredibly oppressive country. As soon as the wheels were down at the airport, there's just this darkness that came over us, this feeling of oppression, and it only lifted when we were wheels up, flying out of New Delhi. But it really gave me a heart for missionaries that spent 4 years, in a foreign country. They need that kind of connection from home. Those in prison, I've done a lot of writing to prisoners. Political leaders. Politicians believe that for every one letter they receive, 1,000 of their constituents believe the same thing. So here's a way to vote 1,000 times on your particular issue by sending an email, a letter to your legislator. Church leaders and pastors. I can guarantee you, if you ask your pastor, every Monday he or she is updating their resume and ready to resign. So if you'll send them a note of encouragement, you'll keep them around. Members of the church and shut-ins. You can have a huge impact on the members of your Sunday school class. I served as communication pastor at two, one was a large church, one was a mega church. And one of my roles was sending encouragement through email and social media. I just love being an iPastor. Finally, in this list of who we can email or write is God. And what's the biggest book in the Bible? 150 letters to God. And I can promise you'll never ever get a rejection slip from him. It's also a great way to get your feelings out on paper. I have a friend, C.S. Murphy, who wrote 90 Minutes in Heaven and some Ben Carson story, a lot of bestsellers. But he said, I don't know what I think until I write it down. And so this is a way that you could have your devotional time journaling to God. I have ADD off the chart. And so when I start praying for somebody who has cancer, I start praying for their radiation treatments, and I start thinking, boy, radiation's a bad deal. Just think of Godzilla, And I wonder why all those Japanese movies are so cheap. Can't they afford a better budget than this guy walking around in a Godzilla? And then I'm going, oh my gosh, I was praying for my friend with cancer, and now I'm wondering about corny Japanese movies. So I write my prayers down. That way I can keep my focus. I don't go wandering off. My mind is like a box of kittens. It's just, they're all over. So, letters. Another area is local churches, sermons and talks. I believe that speakers are first good writers. Even if you only write in your head, you need a good lead. You need to develop the central premise. You need a great ending to wrap it all up. And so most sermons, seminars, talk to women's groups crash on takeoff and landing. That's where all airplanes, you never have an airline just kind of crash in midair. It always crashes at takeoff and landing. And so I always write out verbatim my takeoff and my landing, because you've probably sat in a sermon where the pastor says, now finally, and you think he's bringing it in for a landing, and all of a sudden, he's back up in the air with another point. And, it's kind of disconcerting as you're sitting there in the pew. So make sure you have a way to bring that talk in safely. So that's why I always write out the very first lines of my opening and the very last. I can bring that plane in safely. Direct mail. This is a great way if you have an email list. If your church has one, I can guarantee you a writing assignment if you want to volunteer to do that for him or her. And another one, this you probably never thought of this, but grants. My wife was working as a pastor at a small church, and Lilly Foundation gives millions of dollars away in grants. And she said, we really and you need to update things, technology-wise. So she wrote a grant for getting a giant screen, a really nice video projector, all the software that went with it, sent this in and got $10,000 from Lily. So that was a pretty good writing assignment, write the grant, get $10,000. Number 10 is bulletin material. Most bulletins are fairly boring. You just have the who's in the hospital and what's the next thing on the worship schedule. But I have a friend, she calls her pastor every Monday to find out what he's talking about, and she'll write a poem for the bulletin, sends it in Thursday. And that's a great way for people to remember what the pastor talked about. She's got this poem on the back of the bulletin. And you're going to forget 90% of what you hear. So that's a great way to retain what you have spoken if you're a pastor. If you have like a little devotional on the back that ties in with your message. Now this one sounds just kind of boring. Job descriptions and policies. And so understanding who does what and who gets what really prevents a lot of church splits. How many hours is the pastor expected to spend in the office? Are ushers adequately informed about their duties? Who's going to clear the snow in the winter? Who gets flowers in the hospital? And how far do you go in sending flowers for funerals? This is my second cousin, twice removed from Peoria. Does the church send them flowers? Or does it just send the immediate family? And the reason there are splits in churches is people feel like they're not being treated consistently or being treated fairly. And so job descriptions and policies are one way to do that. Is there a charge for using the church for weddings and funerals? And so conflicts become minimized when staff have good job descriptions. They know exactly what they're required to do. And members know what their rights are as a church member. And so policies will treat each parishioner fairly, impartially, reduces misunderstandings. I'm sorry, that your cousin 3 times removed in Peoria is in the hospital. We're praying for him, but we only send flowers to immediate family. So you can prevent a church split with your writing. So consider doing job descriptions and policies. Number 12 is a history of your church. Understanding the church's history provides a sense of tradition and accomplishment and loyalty, a sense of mission. While my wife was pastoring a church in north of Fort Wayne, we discovered it was an Underground Railroad station 150 years ago, the actual building. And we discovered they really didn't have a well-documented written history, because this was a church building that was the oldest building still being used as a church in our denomination. It was one of the key links to the Underground Railroad from Fountain City up to Detroit, where they could go over into Canada. And it just gave the congregation a sense of pride, like, we were a part of history. And we discovered that the original front door that had been put into storage actually had bullet scars in it when the slave owners came after the property. And so it just was an exciting time for our church to relive the social justice that our church had in fighting slavery. So church history can give you a sense of the past and encouragement for the future. Please, plays and seasonal programs. I have another friend who writes an Easter production for every year. The problem with a lot of the skits and sketches you buy offline is they're trying to keep everybody happy, from Pentecostals to Presbyterians. And because they're trying to reach everybody, they don't often reach anybody. And they need to be very safe and very generic, because you want to keep the Arminians happy, we want to keep the Calvinists happy, and they're just so generic. And so she writes seasonal plays, she does dramas for individual services, but it's a great way to enhance the worship experience. My wife and I did a lot of drama. Well, church work is drama, but we did a lot of holiday dramas and intentional drama in our church. And then Lillian has picked it up and created a whole book of our sketches. Number 14 is curriculum. Again, curriculum tends, if it's not coming from your denomination, tends to be very, very generic. So if you want to highlight something particular about your church, you could offer to write a quarter of curriculum. If your church is in a snake handling, you could do a curriculum on that. But then this is important, annual reports. Snooze fest at most churches. What we try to do is get stories of people whose lives have been changed that year. And so it's just a wonderful time. We would shoot videos of them sharing their stories. And our annual reports suddenly were not just about facts, they were about faces. And that's the important thing about annual reports is you don't want to give them just the facts, you want to give them faces and see the dramatic changes that God has made in people's lives. So, annual reports, ask your pastor if you can help spruce up those. Local papers. Next to obituaries, letters to the editor are the number one most read portion of the newspaper. And editors are desperate. They are hungry, looking for well-written, rational, non-libelous letters. And so I started regularly writing letters to the editor, trying to make them really humorous and still make a point. And finally, one day, I get this call from the editor saying, Jim, thanks for sending us all these letters, but how about if we just give you a column on Mondays and you can write anything you want to, but just don't send us so many letters. And, okay, I can do that. So for 15 years, I had a column in the newspaper. It owned 2 other newspapers in the state. And so for 15 years, I was in 3 newspapers writing a humor column on social, moral, civic issues like that. So that really opened up an opportunity. And so letters to the editor, you could be reaching thousands of people. I've been in USA Today, I've been in Time Magazine, just by writing letters to the editor. Now they don't pay anything, but it's kind of nice to say I've been in USA Today or I've been in Time. It at least looks good on your resume. But letters to the editor are just a great way, and maybe they'll give you a column. So keep that in mind. Then there are news releases. Churches or newspapers are always looking for news for the church page. Again, just look around your congregation. Are there interesting stories? Are people doing interesting ministries? Is your church going to have somebody famous coming to speak or to sing? If you will write those, you may, like one of my friends, have a chance to start writing feature stories. So if you're breaking ground, adding staff, interesting people, that would be a great place to get your foot in the door, build up your portfolio of published work. So develop a nose for news, looking around to see what you can write about. The next level are denominational publications. And again, denominational magazines. I have a really small denomination, but at one time they had 5 different magazines that they were producing. And so if you were a member of that denomination, you kind of knew their heart, it was a great way to break in and write feature articles for your denominational publications. So make a list of all the opportunities. For instance, my denomination, we had a denominational magazine, a missions magazine, a daily devotional booklet, and an adult take-home paper, and they all bought freelance work. Try to meet them in person if you're having a general conference for your denomination. Visit denominational headquarters, meet the editors. If you're a member of that church in good standing, they're probably going to be very interested in having a writer from within. So the easy steps to break in there again are letters to the editor, news releases. Again, it's a foot in the door. And finally, you become your own publisher. If you have a computer and an internet connection, you have everything you need to become a publisher. For a worldwide audience, there are over 3 billion people who have internet access. So that means if you put something out on the web, there's a potential audience for 3 billion people. And so one of the things you can do is a website. Another thing you can do, or let's just talk about websites real quick. Here's some pros and cons for the different website programs. This is where you go and it will say, put picture here, put copy here. But Wix, I did a search for them. They are #1 on everybody's list of the easiest to use website program. It's free. I love free. It's simple to use. The cons of them, and the cons for most of them, is they do have ads, and for Wix, it's a 100-page limit. But you can get a lot of writing done in 100 pages. WordPress.com, now there's an org and a com, so we're talking about com right now. But it is free. It has hundreds of templates, and designers love to create templates for WordPress. So you can get just a wonderful variety of different looks for your website. Cons, it's not quite as easy to use as Wix, and again, contains ads. Weebly is another one. It's kind of a recent comer to the game. The pros, it's simple and it's free. Love free and simple. Cons, again, contains ads, and you can't have your own domain name. It's got to have Weebly in your domain address. And to me, that doesn't sound as, it was jameswatkins.com. Doesn't sound as good as jameswatkins.com. So something you want to consider. But starting out, this might be a great way to do it. Blogger is owned by Google, so it loves itself as far as search engines. You have to appease the Google gods. Pros, it's free, it's simple. Cons, limited templates, and it too contains ads. So if you want to move up in the web world, there's wordpress.org. It's free. There are no ads, but you have to have an internet service provider, something like GoDaddy, Bluehost, that will host it for you. All the other ones are self-hosted. You just put your stuff up there, and Weebly, Wix, they all host it for you. But WordPress.org, you have to have a host, but then you don't have any ads. You have your own domain name. It has unlimited features. I mean, it is crazy the number of templates they have, the number of plugins they have. So you can add search, you can add surveys, you can do all kinds of crazy stuff with it. But here's the con, it's not as easy to use. It's going to be a bit of a learning curve. But if you have a 10-year-old grandson, you got a webmaster there, okay? All these free services offer upgrades with more features. And so my website is kind of a Heinz 57 variety. It's got articles, it has audio talks, it has book excerpts, has cartoons, has music, scripts, and videos. So I couldn't be limited to Wix 100 pages. I got like 300 pages. But I really like the way that WordPress.org organizes things. So I've got all these categories up here: articles, book excerpts, cartoons, talks, videos, writer resources. It's just so easy to search for things. And then over here I've got videos. This is, hi, I'm Jim, I have depression. Do you know that writers are like 90% tendency towards depression? But I'm going to be teaching this at Blue Ridge. Depressed people are more creative, they have more empathy towards other people, and they have deeper thoughts. So I share in this video that clinical depression can really be one of those amazing weaknesses that they talked about this morning. They can really make you a dramatic writer. And this one is Yet I'm Intolerant. It's just a comedy sketch. So with that, you've got your own publishing company. Now, some other things you can do with that is you have a website, you got your blog, you can do podcasts. There are all kinds of free opportunities for podcasts. They seem to be the hottest thing right now, and I am scratching my head because I detest podcasts. I have ADD, so I want to be able to scan an article and pick up what I want right now. I am not interested in listening for a half hour to 60 minutes. I want, something I can scan. But for some people, when they're out jogging, when they're driving to work, they love their podcasts. So you may want to consider that. YouTube is another great way to get your voice out there. Just a terrific way to do that. And then you have Facebook Notes. I wouldn't discount Facebook Notes feature. It's where you can post longer pieces. It's a great way to target a specific audience. I have several friends who have exceeded the current 5,000 friend limit, and so they've set up a fan page. There are personal pages, and then there are business pages. They're all free. But the thing with Facebook that just really cheeses me is that Mark Zuckerberg only allows you to reach maybe 10% of your audience. I've got almost 5,000 friends. But he is only allowing me to reach maybe 500 of those. So one thing you can do to avoid that is to, did I mention this before? I think no, I did not. I need to change my notes here. This is why I become very evangelistic about email lists. So we need to put email lists in there in the top 25. So you may end up with 26 today. We're throwing in a bonus. But email lists are a part of the holy trinity of marketing. You have email lists, social media, and your website. And those are where you develop your so-called platform. You haven't been here quite long enough, but if you've been to any other writers' conferences, you've heard, you gotta have a platform. Well, that's part of building up that platform, is your email list, your social media, and your website. But with the email list, you control it. You get to send out what you want. And I'm becoming more and more concerned when things like Focus on the Family are banned from Google search engines because they are hateful in their views on homosexuality and same-sex marriages. And so I think this is just, I'm not a prophet, but I'm just worried that as more and more people get banned and kicked off of Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, that email is going to become more and more important to us, that we control who sees that. We control our lists. We control the message. And unless MailChimp or Constant Contact or something comes after you, you're pretty free. They're not doing as much policing as Facebook, Twitter, and those. So email list is an important way to get your message out. I send out my email twice a month, first of the month and then about 15th of the month. But it has like my most recent posts and articles and bits of encouragement. Excuse me, I'm drying out here.
When I tried that, they limited me like 50 people.
What, Facebook?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But if you pay, you'll lose that percentage up. And the more you pay, the more percentage. So
I went to Constant Contact, but now it's
okay. Well, I think
a lot of money, but it.
MailChimp is up to 2,000 per mailing, and so I could send out 2,000 a day and still be under that. I've got some missionary friends that'll notice when I get their email, it'll say batch 1 or batch 2. So apparently what they're doing is they've got one list that goes out to the first 2,000, and then they turn around and send it to their other account of 2,000. So there are some ways to get around that, but it is where you have more control. And here's what they found, that email lists are 40 times more effective than Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg does not want you to hear that, but email is 40 times more effective than Facebook. So I would really work at developing your email list. On my website, there's a place to sign up. You can include it in your taglines, whatever. Okay, let's go on to actual book producing, ebooks and PODs.
That's a quick.
Yes, sir.
Instagram and Twitter are huge right now.
Mm-hmm.
somebody else talking about it, they mentioned that if you don't have that, that's where the younger people are.
Exactly.
Facebook is for us old folk.
Yeah, Facebook is for old people, Instagram is for young people, and so I'm on both. I make sure that I duplicate everything I put on Facebook, on Instagram.
Okay.
Quick story. I wrote a series of books back in the 80s for teens on their questions on sex, death, and the supernatural. And I had a big book signing at a huge family bookstore. And this little teeny bobber comes up there, and she looks at my name tag, and then she looks at my book, and then she looks at my face, looks at the name tag, looks at the book, and says, "You don't look anything like your book." So I don't necessarily put my face on a lot of stuff. I'd rather have my Instagram fans think I'm, this really hip 30-year-old guy. All right, self-publishing. Before you self-publish, ask yourself these 3 questions. Has a royalty publisher praised your book but told you there's a limited market? And then most authors, you've got to prove that there's a market. So has a royalty publisher said, this is a really great book, but it's just maybe too small or too niche for us? Number 2, do you have a way of reaching that market through speaking, podcasts, website, whatever? In the case of Gary Smalley, he was successfully selling his books, self-published books, from the back of his room during popular seminars. So with self-publishing, you are the marketing department. And then 3, do you have the money to do it well? So number 1, as a royalty publisher praised your book, but told you there's a limited market. And number 2, do you have a way to reach that market? And number 3, do you have the expendable money to produce a quality book? There are a lot of free programs out there. You can go to KDP, which used to be CreateSpace, and now it's Kindle Direct Publishing. It's free, but you can end up with very amateurish covers, lack of editing, and it can really destroy your reputation if you get a poorly designed, poorly written book out there. So I actually work for EA Books, which is a self-publishing company. I also try to discourage people from publishing with us because they may have been getting all these letters saying, this is awful. No, they're always more kind. They'll never tell you that. But if you just get standard rejections, that could be a sign that maybe there's some problems with the writing, and self-publishing is not the answer. I mentioned in the Get to Know You, I just got a rejection slip yesterday from Revell, but it was a really nice rejection slip. Vicki Crumpton said, "This is a great book. It's an important topic. You and your daughter have done a wonderful job in laying this out. The writing is great, but it's just not a fit for us." Oh, okay. But if you're getting that kind of feedback, that's a good sign. And it may be that there's too limited a market and you can reach that market. So I would love to talk to you about self-publishing with EA Books. We're economical, we're ethical, and excellent. All our people work, they're moonlighters. They work in professional editing, professional design, and they moonlight for EA. So we really don't have any, 95 employees working for us. We're all moonlighting. But because of that, the same person who is working for Zondervan is working for you on your book cover. The same person that's editing it for Thomas Nelson is editing your book. So we're all moonlighters and in the field. So I'd love to talk to you about that, but I would also caution you, that you can do it free, but it's going to hurt you if it comes across poorly. So I have 1 minute if you have any questions about Ministry of Writing or 25 rejection slip markets. Yes, sir.
We were talking about the percentage of books that sell less than X number, which is an awful. That means you can't have any significant publishing company behind you, right? Would you publish a book that sold 20?
No. Well, yeah, because you're paying for it. I would discourage you from it, but there is a point that if you want to write it for your family and friends, that's legitimate. But if you're going into it thinking, I'm going to make my living doing this,
Oh, okay.
then self-publishing may not be for you. But there are lots and lots of success stories. You've got the Living Bible. You've got T.D. Jakes' Woman Thou Art Loosed. You have the Christmas Box. You have the Shack. And there are a few that actually do take off and do extremely well. I have 3 self-published books that one of them Tyndale House picked up, one of them Wesleyan Publishing picked up, and one of them Concordia picked up. And now that, to just be real honest with you, the feeling among publishers, if you have self-published and it didn't sell 10,000, maybe there isn't a market, we're not interested.
Right, yeah, I've heard that same number.
Yeah. So, I would love to talk to you about it, talk it through. So I'm definitely not a hard sell. But I think it's a good way to get your work out there and ministering. So anyway, thank you so much for coming. If you want to sign up to talk to me, I'd love to do that. People at home, so glad you were here. And time for a lunch break.